Hi, everyone. Thank you to Confectionery Live for having me. And thank you to Caitlin for organising this event. My name is Thea Parson. I'm the Climate and Forest Associate at Mighty Earth, where I work on campaigns fighting to end deforestation and environmental and human rights violations in agricultural supply chains with a focus on West Africa and Southeast Asia. So Mighty Earth is a global environmental advocacy organisation working to defend nature for people and the planet. We achieve transformative change by persuading leading industries to dramatically reduce deforestation and climate pollution throughout their global supply chains. We do this in the palm oil industry, rubber, cocoa, soy, which is used for animal feed, heavy metals, minerals, and extractive industries. We do this at the same time as working to improve the livelihoods of indigenous and local communities across the tropics. So how do we do this? We do this by carrying out satellite imagery analysis of past and live deforestation. We put this together with rigorous supply chain research and then put together public campaigns alongside communities that have been affected by deforestation, as well as alongside other civil society organizations. We publish reports and communications, and we carry out practical engagement with decision makers, whether that's government representatives or CEOs of agricultural companies, trading companies, or retail and food companies. So Mighty Earth was founded in 2016 to address rampant deforestation by palm oil producers. And since then, we've helped bring about a 90% decline in deforestation for palm oil and driven transformative change in that sector. In the past 8 years, we have also been working in the cocoa sector, which I will be talking about today. We've brought our success that we've seen in the palm oil sector and have been working with producers, civil society organizations, government representatives, and chocolate companies in the cocoa sector to address issues such as deforestation, agrochemical use, and farmer poverty in their supply chains. So during today's session, I'm going to delve into some of the most pressing social and environmental challenges in the sector and how chocolate companies are dealing with these issues at the moment. We'll then touch upon the progress that's been made to date to address deforestation in the sector, including the incoming European Union Deforestation Regulation and what this means for different industry actors, as well as how we can really ensure that smallholder farmers can be supported in the implementation of the new rules later this year, which come into force in December of 2024. Which will lead us nicely onto the final part of this session, which will delve into the issue of farmer poverty, which is inextricably linked to the environmental issues in the cocoa sector. And it really requires urgent action from chocolate companies to shift the way that they purchase cocoa to ensure that farmers, who are really the bedrock of the industry, to ensure that they aren't losing out the way that they currently are, so that we can really see some positive change from 2024 onwards. So let's jump in. We all love chocolate. Well, most of us do anyway. Our love for chocolate seems to grow by the year. We've seen a huge increase in growth of the chocolate market and cocoa market. So if we look at the value of the chocolate market in terms of revenue, it was estimated to be worth $127.9 billion in 2022, and it's now predicted to reach $160.9 billion by 2027. Similarly, in the cocoa market, it was estimated to be worth $21.1 billion in 2022 and is predicted to reach $26.3 billion by 2027. So the cocoa and chocolate markets are worth a huge amount, and these markets are set to grow by 4.6% year on year over the next 4 years. But where does the cocoa in our chocolate come from? Around 3/4 of the world's cocoa comes from West Africa, where Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana are the leading producing countries. And this cocoa is grown by an estimated 2 million farmers largely on small plots of land, smallholder farms. The not so sweet truth, though, is that to create space for new cocoa farms, the chocolate industry is fueling deforestation at an alarming rate, and this is accelerating climate change and destroying native habitats. In the last 60 years, Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana have lost around 94% and 80% of their forests, respectively, with at least 1/3 of forest loss to make way for expanding cocoa production. And figures have also shown that in 2018, these two countries, Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana, also had the highest rise in primary forest loss of any tropical country. I'm sure I don't need to explain why forests are important. Aside from being habitats to diverse wildlife and plants, they are also a critical natural resource in the fight against global warming, as they both absorb and store carbon. According to the United Nations, deforestation contributes to about 10% of human-induced greenhouse gas emissions, as when forests are cleared, the carbon that was stored in them is released into the atmosphere. So putting this into the current day, we're currently seeing the extreme visible impacts of the climate crisis every single day across the world, especially in recent months. So forest protection really is a vital tool in the fight against climate change. So let's look at what the cocoa industry is doing at the moment to address these issues. We have seen some progress. I've split these into 3 key areas, and thanks to rigorous research and relentless awareness raising by civil society organizations in cocoa producing countries, as well as civil society platforms and groups in cocoa consuming and selling countries, the severity of this situation hasn't gone completely unmissed, and there has been some efforts to address deforestation. In recent years, we've seen great collaboration between industry actors. So at the November 2017 UN Climate Change Conference, which was COP23, the governments of Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana, alongside leading chocolate and cocoa companies, launched something called the Cocoa and Forest Initiative, also known as CFI. And this is a commitment to end deforestation and restore forest areas through no further conversion of any forest land for cocoa production. Since the launch of CFI, 36 cocoa companies, including many of the most well-known chocolate manufacturers that lots of people will know on your supermarket shelves, have now signed on to the initiative. We're also seeing other collaborative efforts and platforms crop up across the world. Just to name a few, there is something called the Initiatives for Sustainable Cocoa, known as ISCOs, and these are national and EU bodies which exist in France, Germany, and Switzerland, which come together to discuss solutions to address big sustainability issues in the cocoa sector. And there are also platforms such as the Retailer Chocolate Collaboration. These platforms are really encouraging and a necessary first step to building sustainable solutions. But companies must go beyond this to transparently share supplier information. We'll go into some of the new technologies that exist in the industry, and it's really important that beyond these collaborative platforms and discussion areas, that companies are really taking on board the activities that they can be taking on the ground in cocoa producing countries. So in terms of technology, there's been some huge breakthroughs and innovation in satellite monitoring technology over the past decade or so. These satellite imageries can show live and past images of forest areas, and we can use those images to detect deforestation that has either taken place in the past or currently, and we'll show some examples of this in a moment, but you can see where forest has been lost in a certain area and also be alerted to risks of deforestation that are happening as we speak. So the good news is that some of these monitoring systems are being embedded in company sustainability initiatives, which is a vital step in the journey towards traceable supply chains and addressing deforestation. But for this to be truly effective, we need all companies to be taking on board these technologies and using the funding and resources that they do have from the huge profits in cocoa companies and putting them towards really understanding where their cocoa comes from and the possible impacts it's having on the forests where it's grown. So if I go on to the next slide, I will just show you two maps. This first one is our Mighty Earth Cocoa Accountability Map in Côte d'Ivoire. And this is showing forest cover loss from 1990 through to 2015. And as you can see, the areas in green have been decreasing since 1990, and this has largely been in line with the increase in cocoa production. And if I go on to the next slide, we look at a similar but a different angle of our cocoa accountability map in Ghana. And these red dots are showing deforestation alerts which have cropped up since 2001, which you can see have slowly been taking over the whole country. And these are forests that have been lost largely around protected forest areas. So the areas in grey on this map are national parks or protected forest areas, and these red dots are where trees are being cleared, again, largely for cocoa production. So we know that these tools do exist, as we've shown just from these maps here, but we need for companies to be using this technology and creating their own maps of their own supply chains and publicly sharing where they're sourcing their cocoa from in order to hold them accountable and for them to be able to see whether there are possible risks of deforestation in their supply chain. So next, I will come to the third area of progress in the industry, which is regulation. So at the end of 2022, the European Commission and the European Parliament voted to pass the European Union Deforestation Regulation, which is known as the EUDR, and slightly easier to say that. This entered into force in June of 2023, and the rules behind that regulation will be applicable as of the 30th of December this year. Given that Europe is the largest importer of cocoa beans worldwide, and they account for 56% of global imports, this regulation does have the opportunity to play a huge part in tackling deforestation in West Africa. So I'll just delve into some of the details of what that regulation means, what that means for different actors, and how we can ensure that cocoa farmers are being supported. So the EUDR requires companies to ensure that the products that they place on the EU market or export from it are not associated with deforestation. The products that are included in that regulation also include cattle, coffee, oil palm, rubber, soy, and wood, and cocoa, of course. And under cocoa products, this could include, but is not limited to, chocolate, cocoa powder, cocoa paste, cocoa butter, cacao nibs, and shells, and any other derivative of the cocoa tree. For these cocoa products to then enter the European Union market as of later this year, they have to meet three main requirements. The first one is that they have to be traceable. And the second is that they have to be deforestation-free. And the third is that they have to be legal. Just to break down what each of those key terms mean, the first, traceable, means that the company placing the product onto the market has to submit a statement, a due diligence statement, that shows the origin of the product. including a GPS location of the supplier and the buyer. And this is known as GPS polygon mapping. So they have to share a boundary, which shows the boundary of a farm where the cocoa was grown. The second area is deforestation-free, which, as it says on the tin, it means that the cocoa product must be sourced from land that has not been deforested after the 31st of December 2020, which is the cutoff date for sourcing deforestation cocoa. And the last point is that it has to be legal. So the company importing the product has to ensure that their supply chain activities comply with all of the relevant local laws, including land tenure laws, environmental laws, human rights laws, labour laws, and trade and custom regulations of the sourcing country. So if that's from Côte d'Ivoire, it has to be in line with those. If it's from Ghana, likewise. And so this is a real landmark regulation. It symbolises a clear step forward in policies to address deforestation. For large chocolate manufacturers and retailers, this requires swift action to gain full visibility of their supply chains over the next 11 months. Importantly, this also requires them to put resources and funding into ensuring that farmers that are growing their cocoa have the necessary tools to meet these requirements as well, and ensure that they're fairly compensated for putting in the time and labour to meet these requirements. So we really do see the EUDR as an opportunity for large chocolate manufacturers to understand where they source their ingredients and better understand who is making their cocoa and how it's getting to them, as well as an opportunity for them to better share the profits of the industry. So whilst this regulation is a step in the right direction towards ending deforestation, fighting climate change and biodiversity loss, the new requirements won't be effective without direct support to cocoa farmers. It will require cocoa farmers to carry out the GPS mapping. They're going to have to collect the data on their farms, and those that are already struggling to support their families and find enough labour, enough people to work on their farms, to carry out multiple different sustainability activities on their farms already. This will require more time, labour, and of course the technology to be able to collect that data. So it's really important that farmers are not further disadvantaged by the regulation, and that this is used as an opportunity for chocolate manufacturers to really take into account the true production costs, which already exist before this regulation was put into place. There are really high production costs for cocoa farmers, and this regulation offers an opportunity for those companies to give back to the cocoa farmers that are supplying the cocoa for the chocolate. Which leads us to a really crucial part of this conversation, which I will delve into next, which is to ensure that farmers are receiving a living income. Just to give some context to this situation, in 2023, Oxfam revealed that the world's 4 largest public chocolate corporations, which are Hershey's, Lindt, Mondelez, and Nestle, have together made nearly $15 billion in profits from their confectionery divisions alone since the onset of the pandemic. And this is likely to be much higher by this point. Meanwhile, in Ghana, one of the largest cocoa producing nations, up to 90% of cocoa farmers do not earn a living income, which means that they cannot afford basic dietary staples, clothing, and other household necessities. Many live on just $2 a day, which is a fraction of the price of a box of chocolates or even a bar of chocolates in some countries. And that situation is not dissimilar in Côte d'Ivoire either. So whilst chocolate companies are reaping the rewards of consumer spending, particularly over the holiday season, Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter, Valentine's Day, sadly, these benefits do not reach the pockets of the farmers who are actually growing the main ingredients for our chocolate and sweet treats. The right to an adequate standard of living is an internationally recognized human right, and it's necessary for obvious reasons. I think no one can deny that, but it needs to be the central focus of how chocolate companies interact with cocoa growers, and at the moment it is not. Farmer poverty is also a driver of just about every other problem in the cocoa sector, including deforestation, as farmers need to expand their area of production in order to earn more money and produce more cocoa. It's a driver of the overuse of agrochemicals because labor for weeding on cocoa farms is unaffordable in the light of poor payments to farmers. Child labor, because again, it's cheaper than getting in other workers onto cocoa farms, and also gender equality, because women cocoa farmers often earn less than men. There's also significant evidence that the current approaches to raising farmer incomes have marginal impact at best and really need to be drastically improved. Fortunately, in December last year, a group of civil society organizations, which Mighty Earth is part of, called the Voice Network, published a paper which identifies the 3 core steps that companies need to take to revamp their purchasing practices, which is the way in which they buy cocoa. And this will help create a fairer chocolate industry. So the first key step is to pay a fair price. So paying farmers enough to survive and support their households. And this is done by using a calculation known as the living income reference price. And without breaking it down now, this takes into account the real true costs of production, and including inflation and other contextual factors in different areas where cocoa is grown. Secondly, we want companies to share the risks in their supply chains. So that means setting up simple and standard contracts with farmers with clear and fair terms of trade, so that farmers are not the only ones bearing the risks of supplying their cocoa. Because at the moment, the farmers who often have a lot less bargaining power are the ones that are bearing a lot of the risks in the industry, whereas big companies who have the insurance and profits behind them are not bearing these risks. The third issue is that companies need to be transparently reporting their policies and progress on living income. Whilst companies are starting to do this on deforestation with the different CFI action plans, we need to see this in living income. So companies need to publicly share how much they pay their cocoa farmers, how much truly gets to the pockets of the cocoa farmers in their supply chains, and how they've taken into account these different production costs in their calculations for paying farmers a fair price. Equally, as consumers, we deserve to know how companies are progressing on these areas, and deserve to know that the chocolate that we're buying is not coming from a company where they aren't paying a fair price. So we know that big chocolate companies do have the tools, the money, the resources to recalibrate how they buy cocoa. As I mentioned at the start of this presentation, the chocolate industry is worth over 127 billion US dollars, and that is a lot of money that could be put towards creating a fairer and more sustainable industry. I've shared the link to that paper at the bottom of the screen here for anyone that would like to read that further. I highly recommend it, whether you're a chocolate company manufacturer or are just interested in the issues in the sector. So lastly, I'm going to come to some concluding thoughts from this presentation. I think the first big reminder is that deforestation is still a significant issue in the cocoa sector, despite some progress and collaborative efforts. And farmer poverty is a major cause of this. So these issues go hand in hand and both need to be addressed together. The second is that the technology and monitoring tools to address deforestation do exist, and companies need to take advantage of this. The third is that new regulations such as the EUDR does provide opportunities, and it will help companies to better understand where their cocoa comes from, but it has to be accompanied by adequate support to smallholder cocoa farmers. And lastly, chocolate companies need to make significant changes to the way that they buy cocoa to ensure that farmers do receive a living income. That is the end of my session today. I will just leave a final slide at the end. If anyone would like to receive more information, you can reach out to me via email at thea@mightyearth.org, and our website is mightyearth.org. And I've also put the handles of our social media at the bottom of the screen. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out or find more information and our reports on our website.
Thank you to everyone for joining us here at Confectionery Live. Thank you so much, Thea, for joining us as well.
Thank you for having me.
So just to start, what made you want to talk about this topic in particular?
So I came here to talk about deforestation because it's becoming an increasing worry across the world. We've all seen the pictures and videos of rainforests being destroyed across South America, in the Amazon, and here in this topic in West Africa, and particularly in light of the climate crisis and the huge part that forests play in tackling the climate crisis, in storing carbon. I felt like it was really important for us to discuss that in the context of the cocoa industry and how we can all play a part in addressing these issues within the industry.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that struck me from your presentation is this emphasis on this is something we have to address. This isn't an issue we can ignore. So you spoke about in your presentation large chocolate manufacturers having, the resources at their disposal in ensuring greater transparency in their cocoa supply chains. Of course, when we talk about smaller cocoa producers and farmers, they don't necessarily have those resources. So how do you think we can support those farmers best, particularly in light of the legislation coming up?
Yeah, of course. So it starts with paying those farmers, those cocoa producers, a fair price. At the end of the day, farmers need to be incentivized to grow their cocoa more sustainably and to use the land that they already have to grow cocoa rather than expanding the area of land used to produce cocoa and thus creating deforestation. Remunerating cocoa producers for that work means that it can be done effectively, and ultimately is a necessity to ensure that the farmers in your cocoa supply chain are then earning a living income, because without compensating them for carrying out these sustainability activities, whether that's data on the farm, they need to share the boundaries of their cocoa farm, as that's a requirement of the new regulation. And that takes time, it uses technology, it requires labor on these cocoa farms. So these larger manufacturers can support people further down in their supply chain, right at the beginning of their supply chain, by ensuring that they will be remunerated for the work that they're doing. So when we look at the final slide that I put up before, which looks at the purchasing practices of cocoa companies, and the first one is paying a fair price, and this living income calculation really takes into account all of those different production costs. So whether those are sustainability activities, whether that's inflation in the local context, or whether that's particular equipment or things that are needed on the farm in order to produce their cocoa more sustainably.
So moving on to the regulations, which are, of course, going to have a massive impact on the industry. to sort of condense maybe what you've spoken about today, what would be your main recommendations to chocolate manufacturers who are conscious about this regulation? They want to be compliant, but of course, it's going to have a big impact.
Yeah, of course. So it's going to be a race to achieve 100% visibility of cocoa supply chains. And that's going to be a great feat for the industry once it all comes into place. But we just need to make sure that cocoa farmers, smallholder farmers, aren't left behind as we transition to those more sustainable and traceable supply chains. So really understanding where their cocoa comes from, who is growing it, and remunerating farmers adequately and fairly for the cocoa that they are supplying.
Well, thank you, Thea, for delivering this presentation for us and for sharing that information and really sort of putting forward this message that this could have a really positive impact on the industry. So thank you for being here with me.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.